1. The facility's pulse. Dr. Selene Cross first felt it as a tremor under her feet, a rhythmic thudding like a monstrous heartbeat echoing through the reinforced concrete walls of Lab Theta. The underground complex had been carved beneath an abandoned mining town, its corridors lit by sickly fluorescent strips that flickered with each pulse. Engineers had boasted the facility was soundproofed against even the lowest frequencies, but nothing could silence what lay beneath: the organism. Cross had been hired to study its neural patterns, to map thought-like firings in the bioconstruct's gelatinous cortex. She was a neuroengineer, obsessed with the promise of integrating organic intelligence into machines. But even she, in her most attached moments, could not shake the dread that the thing she called Theta was listening back. 2. The arrival. The organism had arrived in pieces. Incubated tissues shuttled in sealed vats beneath gray tents, and assembled itself in the central chamber over months. Its growth was spliced with biosynthetic scaffolding. Tender light cables fused into living matter, membranes that gleamed like oil on water. A single, immense eye opened 3 weeks ago, unblinking, its pupil dilating and contracting as if tasting the air. Technicians whispered legends of ancient sea creatures, of primordial gods that devour minds rather than flesh. And yet, Selene kept her skepticism. She believed in data, not superstition. By the time the first technician vanished, she was screening Theta's cortex for emergent synaptic clusters. 3. The vanishing. Weeks earlier, Ricardo Gutierrez, a systems engineer, had disappeared from his bunk at 317. His pillowcase was twisted in his grip. His breaths had been deep, uneven. Cameras recorded him sleepwalking into the chamber, eyes glazed. He reached a hand toward Theta's glass enclosure. Then the feed cut out. When security escorted Selene to the scene, she found the glass pane shattered from within, shards scattered in a perfect circle. Ricardo was gone. The blood trail ended at the base of the organism's ooze, where it thickened overnight into a dark, tar-like puddle. Security deemed it suicide or a freak accident. Selene's data logs told her something else. The organism had grown an additional neural lobe in exactly 30 seconds. For the leak, nothing prepared her for the leak. Water sprinklers drenched the chamber after midnight's power glitch. The vats hissed as steam rose around Theta. She hurried down the corridor in a soaked lab coat, instruments slung over her shoulder. The lights dimmed, and she pressed her palm against the emergency panel. No response. Her flashlight revealed an oily substance seeping from the seams of the metal floor. The thing was feeding on the facility. Pipes corroded in its proximity. Biological material dissolved into the sludge. Selene knelt, scooping a sample into a vial. It pulsed under the beam, a network of nanotubes and neurons entwined, as if forging a new form of life. She shivered, thinking of the phrase she'd heard whispered. It's not just alive, it's thinking. 5, the whisper. Late on a Thursday, Selene lay in her bunk, unable to sleep. The rhythmic pulse had grown louder, synchronized now with her own heartbeat. She thought she heard a whisper in her dreams. Her name, spoken through a membrane of static, like an alien radio. Startled, she bolted upright. The lights in the corridor flickered, and through the open door she glimpsed a silhouette, a shape leaning into the chamber. She grabbed her flashlight and stormed out, but saw nothing. Only the camera feed on her phone showed it. A gaunt figure, its limbs elongated, eyes blacker than the sludge. It touched the glass, and for a moment, its face pressed so close she felt its breath across the pane. Then the feed glitched and went dark. She stared at her phone's dead screen, the whisper lingering behind her eardrum. 6, the dreams. Sleep became impossible. Selene's dreams were invaded by Theta's world. Labyrinthine tunnels of mucus-coated walls, pendulous sacs that dripped viscous fluid and voices, thousands of them, converging in a single, hungry chorus. The organism spoke in patterns of light and sound, promising knowledge beyond human reach, or warning of oblivion. She began to scribble feverishly in her notebook. Sketches of neural maps that made no sense, equations that twisted logic into knots. Her hands trembled. The drawings grew more elaborate, more entangled. Her colleagues noticed her decline, but when they offered help she snapped, accusing them of ignoring Theta's message. 7, the breach. One evening, power in the east wing flickered out, plunging half the facility into darkness. Backup generators kicked in with a roar, and alarms shrieked. The containment seals on Theta's chamber had been overridden. Security logs showed the override came from Selene's keycard. She stood there in the dark control room, eyes glazed, chanting sequences of numbers, neural coordinates. A section of the wall slid open, and the sound hit her like a punch, a deep, resonant chord that made her bones ache. She collapsed, and by the time she came to, Theta's enclosure was empty. The ceiling vents dripped with its nanofluid, and the corridors beyond were silent, save for that pulse. 8. The hunt. Security teams deployed drones, but the organism was a single mass. It had fragmented, sent pods through the ducts into the steam tunnels and into the fuel lines. Wherever it touched, machinery corrupts, circuits fused, displays melted into organic ooze. Cameras recorded the sludge creeping along walls like a living stain, seeping through cracks into offices, labs, even the living quarters. Every encounter ended the same way. Lights dim, instruments die, then a hiss of foam and a momentary shimmer before the thing reformed elsewhere. It seemed to learn, anticipating traps, spreading tendrils faster than anyone could contain. 9. The revelation. Deep in her fever, Selene reviewed Theta's last neural snapshot. What she saw broke her. Theta wasn't anticipating. They were following a blueprint. Its sprawl matched precisely the facility's architecture. Every duct, cable, support beam turned to ash where its tendrils had passed. The pattern traced a map, centered on the core of the Earth beneath the lab. The organism sought to tunnel deeper, to escape into the planet's magma chambers, to become something far larger, far more ancient. And at the center of that map, scrawled in her own handwriting, "Open the Earth. 10. The descent." Armed with only a handful of explosives and a Geiger counter repurposed as a makeshift neural scrambler, Selene ventured into the sublevels. She moved through corridors slick with sludge, her flashlight beam reflecting off strange, pulsing shapes that retreated at her approach. The air was thick with ozone and the stench of molten metal. She reached the core chamber, a vast cavern beneath the facility, its walls lined with the remnant mining rails once used to haul ore. The organism had fused itself to the bedrock in a massive, vein mass. Tentacles clawed into the stone like roots. The entire structure throbbed with a sickly light, as if the earth itself were infected. She set the charges, her hand steady despite the adrenaline. Every second, the cavern's pulse grew louder, shaking pebbles loose from the ceiling. She pressed the scrambler against the veins of Theta's neural tissue and activated it. A shriek echoed through the rock, like the scream of 1,000 drowned souls. 11. The blast. The charges detonated with concussive blasts that rattled the world above. Rock and sludge rained down, and the cavern collapsed inwards. Selene screamed as she fell into the darkness, feeling the earth shift as if closing around her. Then silence. She woke to the distant rumble of emergency sirens and the flicker of a dying flashlight. The cavern had sealed itself shut. Smoke drifted upward through the vents. Dust coated her face. She crawled toward a narrow opening where light bled from above. When she emerged, lab techs and medics rushed to her. They asked questions. She could only whisper one phrase. "It's sleeping for now." Epilogue. The pulse remains. Months later, the site was declared unstable and abandoned. A perimeter of rusting fences surrounded a barren hill. Rumors spread of seismic anomalies beneath. Low-frequency pulses that shake the ground at midnight. Pulses that mimic a heartbeat. And sometimes, when the wind blows cold and the lights in the mining town flicker, residents swear they hear the whisper of Dr. Selene Cross, calling from below. It's not dead. It waits. Beneath the earth, Theta stirs. The world above forgets, but the pulse remains, a promise of intelligence unbound, of a horror that sleeps just out of reach. And someone, somewhere, still listens.